Okay, we're recording.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Jeremy Lemaster. I am the Executive Director of Free State Justice. My pronouns are he and they, and I'm so excited to be talking with you all today around some of the important issues related to LGBTQ folks in the state of Maryland and the different ways that we as individuals and as a community can really support the LGBTQ community as a whole. I think for me today, I'm going to focus a little bit just on the history and mission of Free State Justice and LGBTQ policymaking in the state of Maryland, as well as provide some kind of operations and strategy updates as we pave through, really a lot of new different issues that are popping up in relationship not just to COVID pandemic, but to ongoing issues of racism in our country, and income inequality, and the ways in which members of the LGBTQ community are disproportionately and uniquely impacted by some of these issues. From there, I'll talk a little bit about why, sort of in the big picture, these issues do matter, and then I'll kind of focus this down into the most immediate next steps as it relates to our upcoming legislative session in the state of Maryland, as well as ongoing sort of policy issues that we'll be looking at in the near future as we continue to address needs. I'll wrap up today with talking a little bit about opportunities for folks to get involved in the political process in the state of Maryland and to really lend their voice to making change in their local communities as well as in the state. So for Free State Justice, we are the merger of Equality Maryland and the Free State Legal Project. Both of these organizations have existed for a number of decades. And when we merged in 2016, the vision was to create a Maryland where all lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer individuals felt that they could live authentically with safety and dignity in all the communities across the state. So in order to kind of achieve this vision, Free State Justice decided to center improving the lives of low-income LGBTQ Marylanders, both through direct client legal services as well as policy advocacy. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we kind of describe or envision policy advocacy. Because for us, we feel that by centering low-income LGBTQ folks, we can really ensure that all LGBTQ rights are prioritized in the work that we're doing. So within that articulation of our vision and mission, we zero in on really six kind of unique categories to really ensure that anytime we're examining a policy, a program, or an issue, that we're thinking about it through a number of different lenses and the ways in which different elements of our community who have been marginalized could be impacted. So in addition to folks with lower limited incomes, we work to center trans and gender nonconforming folks, people of color, especially Black and Indigenous peoples, youth, elders, and those that live in geographically underserved communities, more rural communities, and not necessarily in urban centers that typically are better resourced with LGBTQ services and needs. So in going about doing our work, this is kind of the approach that we take. We start off with direct client legal services as the framework or sort of the base into which we engage with our community in addressing their immediate needs for legal services, and then beginning to build pictures of what lives are like and some of the legal issues individuals are facing in work, in education, in their personal lives, etc. From there, oftentimes we'll take on impact litigation cases, and these are more advanced legal cases with decisions that could have wide reaching effects across the state. And through impact litigation, we're able to ensure that if one or multiple plaintiffs or individuals are having issues or concerns, hopefully we can advocate for was talking about, with our impact litigation, the ability for us to serve larger sort of swaths of the community through individual casework. Once we've engaged in both legal services and impact litigation, we get to see a better ways in which we can change policy within different elements of our community, whether this be through legislative means, through General Assembly, making laws, or administrative advocacy, working with state agencies, organizations, or even corporations to improve their services or interactions with LGBTQ individuals, or just ensuring that we are mobilizing community members to access available resources in order to improve some of the issues impacting community members. Once we've achieved resources, rights, or policy wins, it's really important that we're doing the outreach, training, and education, not just of our allies, but our community members as well, around what their rights are. By only being informed about what your rights are in the state of Maryland, are you going to be able to ensure that those rights are being secured for yourself, for your peers, for your family, and for your community members? So we really see that as just as important as the policy work we do. Once we've started engaging in this piece, we really then kind of think of ourselves as really working to foster LGBTQ leadership within our communities, as well as building the capacity of services for community members. And we really look to build up direct service providers and other LGBTQ organizations in these spaces, so that the state has a better sort of network and sort of safety net for LGBTQ folks across the state. And it's really from this model that we have sort of visualized justice and our pursuit of that. So just as a kind of a quick, kind of big picture of some of our work in any given year, last fiscal year, we had about 400 requests, and most of this data is pre-pandemic, just as an FYI. So we don't really have, our annual data. There will likely be some significant changes as we just see the havoc that COVID-19 has had on everyone's lives. But prior to the pandemic, we had 400 requests for assistance, the opening of 200 cases and closing of an additional 200. We have a pro bono lawyer network consisting of about 250 individuals, and in total, they donated over 1,700 hours last year. With that, we sort of estimate a value of about $500,000 just in donations from these lawyers to community members and providing client services. So in terms of our kind of current case practice areas, and part for me, this is kind of discussing a little bit why it matters, why are LGBTQ rights important, especially in 2021, especially in a state that a lot of folks would consider to be progressive, to be democratic, to be blue, et cetera, and to be very responsive to the needs of LGBTQ issues. And what I'm going to really work to highlight today is that despite, incremental wins and despite some big picture achievements like marriage equality, this does not necessarily translate into experiences of lived equity with individual community members, and that some of these issues really only impact certain layers or levels of our community. And so this is kind of where it really does matter that in looking at LGBTQ issues, we take a very comprehensive look to the ways in which LGBTQ folks are disproportionately impacted in certain areas. So family law is definitely one of them. So even though we've achieved marriage equality relatively recently, Maryland was one of the first states in the country to pass marriage equality, we still have ongoing issues around family law. Marriage did not just kind of create the silver bullet of miraculously ensuring that LGBTQ families were supported across the state and its institutions. So there's a significant ongoing rights for LGBTQ families when it relates to parental rights, custody determinations, family leave, et cetera. A lot of policies, even one of the policies we're looking at updating this coming session really kind of center around outdated ideas of what motherhood is and who mothers are, doesn't recognize that, families can have multiple mothers in them, and that mothers are not necessarily always the individuals who are carrying their child and giving birth to their child. And so just because we had one win doesn't mean the entire legal code suddenly is up to par. And so this is a kind of ongoing case practice area for us in really supporting LGBTQ families. The second is around healthcare access and discrimination. So even though the Affordable Care Act went a long way in ensuring access for LGBTQ folks, that doesn't necessarily mean that those culturally competent providers exist and are available and ready to provide healthcare services. So part of the work that we engage on really is, one, ensuring that healthcare providers in the state of Maryland are non-discriminatory in the services that they provide, and that they're able to provide services for LGBTQ community members in ways that are affirming and responsible. Another kind of major area too within healthcare discrimination is around healthcare insurance. Even though in the state of Maryland, most trans affirming care is covered by both state insurance and private insurance, is required to be covered by insurance providers. That is not always the case. And so we also typically are seeing a lot of issues still in achieving or securing affordable, life-saving healthcare, especially for trans and non-binary folks and low-income LGBTQ folks. The next is around employment discrimination. So even though Maryland, again, was one of the first states to pass a statewide ban on both employment and public accommodations discrimination for LGBTQ folks, there were some key exemptions in that ban, specifically for religious institutions and some private providers as well. And even if this ban of discrimination exists, it doesn't mean that people are still not discriminated against. And so we routinely can take up casework in this area where, because of someone's LGBTQ identity or of their family status, they are discriminated in terms of employment. Conditions of confinement is another major issue. So this is talking about the lived experiences of incarcerated LGBTQ folks. Oftentimes, LGBTQ folks are not housed in safe conditions according to their gender. And beyond that, they are not provided adequate medical care for trans or non-binary folks. So one of the challenges we routinely have is working to improve the conditions of confinement for individuals that are incarcerated, as well as juveniles in the juvenile justice system. Identity documents for trans and non-binary folks. So Maryland recently approved an X-gender marker for driver's licenses, which was an amazing win for the state. However, there's still a lot of work to be done in sort of translating this into other forms of identity documents, things like marriage certificates, birth certificates, licensure for different things other than driving, right? So for example, one of our cases currently is looking at the licensures for social workers in the state, which has not adopted or accommodated not just X-gender markers, but people's actual legal names, and will sort of retain dead names in some cases. And so we are, even though we've passed legislation to improve the ways in which gender and markers and identity documents are done for individuals in the state, there's sort of continued work that needs to be done. Identity documents are very much a base kind of core need. It is very much a precursor to any other access to services in the state. 9 times out of 10, you deem some form of identification anywhere you go in applying for any type of services. So even if you're looking for housing, food, or healthcare, identity documents really are the precursor to all of that. And if individuals don't have access to affirming and accurate identity documents, it can dramatically impact their ability to access other life-saving services. And then again, some of the ongoing enforcement of not just anti-discrimination laws in different agencies, but those specifically related to public accommodations. This is the one that we routinely still kind of see casework around, where we have folks who are denied public accommodations because of, again, LGBTQ identities. Some developing issue areas that I wanted to kind of focus on that are not necessarily within our current case practice, but we are continuing to monitor and to conduct additional research on, include just kind of the further decriminalization of individuals. LGBTQ folks are more likely to be incarcerated than non-LGBTQ folks. And so we have a vested interest in works to decriminalize, the experiences of individuals with police officers and corrections, and really see this as a major need within the LGBTQ community. Homelessness is an ongoing issue for LGBTQ folks. It's been well documented that LGBTQ youth are more prone or susceptible, vulnerable to homelessness, but there's little evidence that really looks at the issues of ongoing or chronic homelessness in LGBTQ adults as well. So this is another issue area that we're wanting to make sure that, even though we've done a lot of great work in recent years around the Ending Youth Homelessness Act and sort of building out LGBTQ specific housing or homelessness services, there is a lot of need that is still unmet. HIV policy modernization. So Maryland is one of the states that still criminalizes HIV transmission. In fact, there have been some very prominent cases within the state of Maryland around individuals being criminalized for HIV or discriminated against because of their HIV status. So as we move forward, we're looking to decriminalize HIV transmission in the state, in addition to ensuring that HIV discrimination is addressed in a lot of other areas of life for Marylanders. Resources and rights for sex workers, both those that are engaging in survival sex work, are former sex workers, or are still currently sex workers, really ensuring that they have access to resources and safety from violence. The ongoing, violence that the sex worker community is exposed to, especially those that are street-based sex workers, needs to be addressed, and we're working to really monitor and sort of assess the best way to better support sex workers in the state of Maryland. Resources for LGBTQIA+ elders. The state of Maryland is, there are some other states that have gone very far in their Department of Aging, recognizing the unique needs of LGBTQ elders and providing training and services for LGBTQ elders in their state. Maryland is not one of those states, and there is a significant need and silence around this issue, and something we're looking to really change as we move forward with our policy work. And then immigration is another kind of major underserved area within our community. In addition to immigration in general, Maryland has seen a dramatic increase in its immigrant population, and specifically with its Latine and Latinx communities. There are a lot of different counties and cities, including Baltimore City, are identified as emerging immigrant areas with a rapid increase in individuals that would greatly benefit from Spanish language resources. In addition to that, the existing immigration resources within a lot of communities can be based around service providers that might be religious or might not be necessarily equipped to deal with the unique needs of LGBTQ immigrants, especially those that are trans and non-binary. What does it look like to undergo identity document updates while simultaneously applying for asylum or immigration. And so looking to really ensure that LGBTQ immigrants are supported within the state of Maryland. So just as a quick update in terms of, oh, sorry, are we recording now? Can I go?
Yes, you can.
Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Awesome. All right. So for Free State staff, we had the amazing opportunity to really add on 2 new full-time staff attorneys in the state of Maryland for Free State Justice, as well as a state staff accountant. We've also built out our leadership team a little bit more strategically. 2 staff members were elevated to director level positions, and we also brought on a development director in January. I also joined in as executive director mid-year in July. So the 4 of us have really been moving forward in trying to create a more non-hierarchical, flatter organizational structure with a lot more cross-collaboration around both our projects and programs, as well as decision-making, in an effort to really ensure that there is some level of diversity in the ways in which we go about doing our work. So with that, I do want to kind of just jump right into a little bit of a policy preview of some of the things that are really top priority as we head into session. What I'll just kind of start off with is a huge caveat is that a number of our policy priorities were interrupted by COVID. And so what we do have is a lot of pieces of legislation that didn't pass last year, not because they weren't supported, but we just ran out of time and capacity. And so a lot of those are back on the table this year, and we'll be working to really ensure that they do get through the House and Senate this year. There is a handful of new pieces too that we're introducing or we're working with others to ensure that they get passed. But I'm really excited at what we have ahead for us. But along with everyone else, we are kind of working to figure out how to best go about doing a virtual legislative session, especially as it comes to things like testimony, doing advocacy work, and getting the attention of our legislators as well as community members to really educate them about these issues, their importance, and their need. And that's really where youth really, I think, come into the picture of really providing a unique perspective, framework, and approach to these issues that I think can really resonate with certain pieces of our community. So the first few I'm going to really focus on are around identity are really focusing on some issues specific to trans and non-binary folks in the state of Maryland. The first is a piece of legislation that is modernizing both birth and marriage certificates in the state. So like I had mentioned kind of previously in the presentation, even though we've passed an next gender marker for driver's licenses, this hasn't necessarily translated in the ability for trans and non-binary folks to sort of adequately or effectively update birth and marriage certificates. And so we're working with legislators to modernize our code in order to advance that. Another piece that is back on the agenda for this legislative session is the bias, rage, or panic defense ban. So even though we had introduced this as an LGBTQ specific one in the amendment process, it was broadened a bit by legislators to include other categories of difference in part of the bias, rage, or panic defense ban. This piece of legislation is following suit with a number of other states that have banned this defense. There have been a few cases in the state of Maryland where this defense has either been used or at least alluded to in defense. And so we're looking to just kind of swiftly ensure that this ban, that panic defense or bias rage is not a suitable defense in committing violence against individuals that are different than yourself. The last is really around the publication of name changes. Currently, the state of Maryland requires individuals who change their name to publish this in a local periodical of a certain circulation. We are looking to, our long-term goal is to actually remove this process from the judicial system altogether and have it just be an administrative process in the same way you would go about changing your driver's license.
Ready.
Okay, great, thank you. I apologize everyone for the current internet issues. So I'm just gonna go back and talk about the publication of name changes. Again, looking, the long-term goal here is to ensure that the publication of name changes is actually removed as a requirement and eliminated, and ensure that that name changes are not a judicial process or an administrative process. However, in the meantime, we are looking to streamline the process a bit and make it a little bit easier by requiring the judges that receive a request for this publication of a name change to be waived, that they have to grant that request. And so that is the version of legislation that we've worked with legislators on for this upcoming session. Next is really a few pieces focusing around youth. The first is the Inclusive Schools Act. This is ensuring non-discrimination in student services throughout both private and public and private educational institutions that are receiving public monies. So the idea behind this is that if any public school or any school that is receiving state taxpayer funds has to be non-discriminatory in nature in terms of their policy as it relates to LGBTQ folks. There is created a requirement for training around dealing or working with LGBTQ students and providing services to them. And 3, it establishes a mechanism for individuals to file discriminatory complaints in order to have, and sets up a process for those to be addressed. And so these are things that did not exist before that this act would be ensuring. Similarly, we've been working on a Youth and Families Protection Act, and this would do a similar thing, but within child welfare services as well as juvenile justice services. So again, requiring non-discrimination in both of those agencies and the services that they provide, and ensuring that any public entity as well as any private entity receiving state money is required to adopt these non-discrimination languages and be trained on administering services to LGBTQ folks. And it creates a mechanism, again, for individuals to be able to file complaints and actually sort of document this process. I think these two together, we're really hoping to strengthen the support for LGBTQ youth throughout the state, both in education and other services that they encounter. Additionally, we have been working with the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Act to ensure that part of that funding, this education funding plan, earmarks funding to ensure LGBTQ services are culturally competent and affirming. And then last on this list is a commission to establishing a commission on history, culture, and civics in education. So this is a commission made up of individuals to provide recommendations on the inclusion of marginalized communities in history, culture, and civics education, and LGBTQ folks would be part of that. So this goes above and beyond just talking about LGBTQ folks in the context of health class or sexuality education. We would actually work to ensure that LGBTQ folks are talked about in history and culture and in civics. We are also working to support initiatives to eliminate police officers from schools. We are still looking to see where this piece of legislation lands for this coming session. But as this progresses throughout session, we'll be in support of it as LGBTQ folks are disproportionately impacted and targeted by police officers both in and out of schools. We do feel that this piece is in line with priorities of youth who, even if they are victims of bullying and bias, are still criminalized as victims and looking to kind of remove this apparatus. We're also then working to the People's Commission to Decriminalize Maryland to decriminalize failure to obey. We see this as a very easy way that folks are introduced into the justice system. And we're looking to sort of limit these pathways and to better allow for folks to exist in public spaces and sort of limit these negative interactions with police officers. We're looking to introduce non-discrimination language for long-term care facilities for elders. We're looking to ensure that PrEP and PEP usage can be at least bought over the counter in the same way that you can do emergency contraception for at least the first 3 months in which you might need it. And we're also working on a piece related to medical debt collections and seeing ways in which that low-income LGBTQ folks, especially those engaged in routine healthcare related to HIV treatment, HIV prevention, or transition-related care, that those small debts that might come with routine care are somewhat limited in the amount that individuals can be brought to court and collected money on. And we also have a legislator who is looking to establish a statewide commission, statewide LGBTQ commission, and this would create a 15-person body to provide oversight, guidance, and recommendations to all state agencies as it relates to LGBTQ folks. And so that's really some of the kind of main policy priorities I wanted to focus on today. I'm going to move forward a little bit into the next steps. So I think one of the things that we really are looking to ensure that folks can feel like they're involved and on top of is the first is a policy dashboard and bill tracker that we'll be releasing. This will be updated on a regular basis as we progress throughout session to let folks know when certain hearings are, as well as when certain calls to action are needed around certain policy issues. So this will be a useful tool for individuals to stay informed and on top of the LGBTQI issues in the state. We'll also be rolling out a form to collect testimony, both written and oral, and we'll be especially interested in youth perspectives as it relates to both the Inclusive Schools Act, as well as the Youth and Families Protection Act. We're especially looking for youth that can speak to the experiences of working with child welfare services or the foster care system, whether that be challenges with their foster parents, with social workers or their school systems related to their LGBTQ identity. Those I think would be really key voices we would love to elevate and lift up. And then the last piece will be advocacy toolkits. We'll be creating some around some of these higher priority pieces and sharing with community members so that you all can do advocacy on your own, have some guidance on some of the facts about the issue area, facts about the policy that's being proposed, and information on who's sponsoring it and who to contact if you really want to connect with the legislator on these issues. And so that is really kind of just where I wanted to start the conversation today. I definitely love to take questions. I will love to follow up with both my email address as well as some of these other pieces of information and a summary. We have a one-pager of the legislative session. Prepared for the legislative session that kind of lists out or highlights all of these issue areas. And so once we have that, I would love to be able to share that with this group.
That's great. That's great. Especially since some of our the members of our group are focusing on pursuing legislation in the Maryland legislative season. So we have a couple of questions. What are some of the major priorities you all have for this legislative season, and what are you willing to compromise on?
That's a great question. And I think for me, really, I think there's a few priorities. I really think that in looking at our client casework, this issue around the publication of name changes really is the most consistent issue that directly is impacting the lives of trans and non-binary Marylanders, right? And so for me, this I think really kind of stands out as the top line priority issue for a number of reasons. One, it's been over 3 years now. I think that we've tried to work in different ways with legislators on this issue. And although I'm new to this conversation in this space, I hear that it has been challenging at times to address concerns of legislators around waiving or eliminating this requirement. So the place that we've gotten to, and again, I think this kind of answers the second question of the compromise, is, like I said, I think in a perfect world, and something that we will be continuing to pursue as we move forward, is really the elimination of courts' involvement in the name change process. Eliminating it so that it's not something that you have to go in front of a judge and talk to a judge and see a judge in order to change your name. We want to be able to kind of eliminate that process altogether. I think that is the ideal. But this is the current compromise we're at because of the real, every year, the number of individuals that we have, clients we have who are changing their names, who want this requirement to be changed. And then that when we request it to be waived, to have that request denied has only increased. And again, not necessarily because folks are, this isn't necessarily because judges are intentionally trying to target a certain group of individuals. They may have just stopped taking a policy of changing, because a lot of people change their names, not just LGBTQ folks. But whatever the framing is, it's disproportionately impacting LGBTQ folks. And so that's really for us is, wanting to address this immediate, need of protecting the safety and security and privacy of trans and non-binary folks as they go through transitioning, as we continue to work on this issue.
What are some of the other issues impacting LGBTQ folks in Maryland?
So I think, for us at Free State, we really, and this is for us, is kind of one of those challenges of where it's, all issues are LGBTQ issues. And so far as that, when you look at income inequality, as kind of like, if you center income inequality, for example, LGBTQ individuals are more likely to experience low or limited income, experience homelessness, susceptible to substance use, et cetera. There's a lot of ways in which the LGBTQ community is disproportionately impacted. And a lot of times that is centered around socioeconomic class and income inequality. And so I think for us, we're really shifting to ensure that we are centering low-income LGBTQ folks in our work. And when we make that shift and kind of change that center, that does, I think, shift a little bit, some of the priorities that we have, not just for this session, but in future sessions. And so I think addressing homelessness, working on police interactions and decriminalization, thinking about sex workers, their rights and resources for them. And I think immigration too, even kind of, again, comes up as, suddenly a lot of these issues become LGBTQ issues in the same ways that, one of my biggest, things that I think about too is how, the minimum wage increase, for example, in the state of Maryland. So even though we've agreed to increase our minimum wage to $15 an hour, for me, that is a women's issue, right? Because the vast majority of minimum wage workers in this country are women. And so I think when we take that kind of same approach, something that we don't traditionally think as a women's issue, but really when you look at it, it very much is, and so that's really the ways in which I want to make sure that we're looking at these other policy issues as we move forward for these things that disproportionately impact LGBTQ folks. We need to focus our attention on that and center that in our work. And so I do think, homelessness, substance use, sex work, immigration, police interactions, these things are going to become the top line priorities for the LGBTQ community in the state of Maryland moving forward.
And our last question is about how other people can get involved, specifically through grassroots organizing.
So I think that, I'm really excited. I mean, I think one of the exciting things is, I think previously a lot of Free State Justice's work was very much in person. And I think that limited our geographic reach and scope. But now that we've all been forced to kind of exist in a virtual environment, I think that's also changed the ways in which we've really realized that we organizationally could have been doing better at reaching other geographies throughout the state. But that moving forward, we really want to make sure that folks are supported everywhere, not just in Montgomery County or Baltimore City, or in Annapolis, right? And so then when I think about how folks can get involved in the grassroots level, I really think, it really does kind of start at home. I look to the number of different organizations that have popped up over the past 3 to 5 years, doing pride-oriented events and celebrations. So you look at Annapolis Pride or Frederick Pride, for example, right? And these really just start as local community members wanting to get together to celebrate, honor, and support the LGBTQ community. And what I think you see now is this is at least that starting point of just let's bring folks together to celebrate LGBTQ life. Has now led to these organizations being a lot more involved in policy advocacy, especially on a local level. I think there are some things that we can successfully do at a state level, but there are other things that is going to require local work. Education, I think, is a great example for this. So even though we can work at a state level to ensure that there's non-discrimination language, right? Um, that's not going to translate into lived equality, like that lived experience of feeling safe in your schools. And that is only going to be done through local, organizing and pushing local council members and PTAs, forming local GSAs, right? And building those support in your community. And changing curriculum, for example, the state doesn't mandate curriculum. It's very much done school board by school board. So if you want comprehensive sexuality education, and if you want LGBTQ folks in your history and civics education, that's something that the school board is is kind of the deciding body on. And so, I think that's kind of the starting point. And so what I'm excited for are things like this testimony collection and the ongoing discussion on these issue areas. We there's more power when we come together and talk about issues as they come up. And if we are seeing the same experiences in Baltimore City and Montgomery counties and Prince George's counties, right? I think that gives us opportunity to come together around solutions and sharing practices and strategies on how to improve. I'm looking, Baltimore City schools has done great work, and both they're not just their student, school policies, but their school policy of LGBTQ employees, and looking to really export that policy to other areas. But we need people on the ground in those areas to really advocate for it in their spaces. So I think we'll be rolling out advocacy toolkits for these specific issue areas, and Free State Justice definitely wants to work to provide resources and connections and help build relationships with these local groups.
Does it make sense, and to really help local groups really advance and do their own level of advocacy.
Well, thank you for joining our conference.